Hello, I'm Jim Kent. I'm the UX architect for RSG, and today Shane and I are going to be talking about the new keyboards that we added in the 10.0 release. So let me switch over here to my slides. Okay, so we're first going to give you an overview of how the new keyboards compare with the existing keyboards that have been in RSG since the beginning. Then we'll be talking a little bit about the different building blocks that the keyboards are built from and how you can use them to create your own custom keyboards. And finally, we'll be giving you an example of building a custom keyboard. And we'll end with some Q&A. Here's the QR code you can scan to get to Slido to ask the questions. Jonathan gave you some other ways to get there, and we'll be putting this up again at the end of the presentation as well. So we added these new keyboards in the 10.0 release, the dynamic voice-enabled keyboards, and there's been some enhancements in the new release in 10.5. So why do we call them dynamic? They're dynamic in that the key layout is driven by a data file. We call that data file the key definition file or the KDF file. It's a little JSON format file that lets you define any key layout that you would like. It also lets you specify some sizing information so you can make the keyboard, so you can control the keyboard's appearance.
And finally, we introduced voice-enabled dictation on all of our keyboards.
So first of all, I'm going to walk through the old keyboard nodes, the original keyboard nodes, and the new keyboard nodes. For each of the original keyboards, there's an equivalent dynamic keyboard. So the first one shown up here in the upper left is what the original keyboard node looks like. And on the upper right beside it is the equivalent dynamic keyboard. So the new node is called dynamic keyboard. Its field interface is very similar to the existing keyboard. So in many cases, it should be really easy for you to switch from using one to the other. There'll be just a couple edits you need to change in addition to changing the name of the node from keyboard to dynamic keyboard. And you can see it looks pretty much the same. Shane, you want to talk about voice dictation?
Yeah, as you can see, the new keyboards have a new voice dictation UI that has a custom interface just for email entry. So you can see the underscores and a hint that says say one letter at a time for precise voice dictating of email addresses.
The new keyboard also supports email suggestion pop-ups. This is only if you put the keyboard into the email domain. But when you do that and you move focus to the @ key, you'll see this pop-up show up that gives you choices for common email domain suffixes. The second keyboard that we had originally was called the mini keyboard. This is a keyboard that just has letters and numbers. We use it internally for search, where you're not going to be entering in, punctuation and symbols and that sort of thing. And it also occupies less space. The equivalent keyboard is called the dynamic mini keyboard. Again, the field interface is very the same, so it should be almost a drop into your app.
And the mini keyboard also has a special dictation interface where you could use whole word search terms. Instead of spelling out letter by letter for precision for an email address, you could use general, full words as in Jurassic Park with context-specific hints for the keyboard.
And at any time, you can move back and forth between dictation and the keyboard, the actual entering in the letters from the grid. The final one of our original keyboards is called the Penpad. This is just for entering a short numeric sequence. The new node is called Dynamic Penpad. You can see the size has changed a little bit. If you don't like the size, it's actually pretty easy for you to use your own KDF file and make the keyboard more the size that you want it. But in general, this one will work for most cases.
And as you can see, the new Penpad is using the voice text edit box, which gives it voice functionality and a new numeric dictating type that's specifically curated for entering numbers.
Okay, and then in addition, there's a fourth keyboard node in the 10.0 and 10.5 release called Dynamic Custom Keyboard. What this does is it lets you actually define your own keyboard layout. So you'll specify a custom KDF file, and the keyboard, the grid of keys down here at the bottom, will display the keys that you want in the order that you want them and allow you to different sizing. In this case, I have a screen where I have this dynamic custom keyboard node on the left, and on the right, some feedback to the user, kind of walking you through a wizard of entering in your name and address. So sometimes we'll want the keyboard to only have letters for name, for instance, and city and state. Sometimes we'll want letters and numbers for addresses and the apartment building numbers. And sometimes we'll only want numbers for the zip code. Like at least in the US, that's the case. So at the bottom here, you can see I put the keyboard into a different mode, and that switched the key layout to only have numeric input. You'll also see that there's these prev and next keys at the bottom. So as the user steps through the process of entering the information, initially there is no previous because you're entering the name, and at the end, there is no next because you're at the last step. And you can control the enabled and disabled keys that way also. Oh, and one more thing, you can actually change the mode of voice entry. So if you're on a numeric keyboard, you can change it to enter in, number by number. If you're in the name mode at the top, you can have full dictation of just saying somebody's name. So next I'm going to take a look at the building blocks that build up these new keyboards. The first one is the dynamic key grid. That's shown highlighted by this yellow box. The key grid lets you specify the KDF file for your keyboard. So it'll let you specify exactly how the key layout is going to happen or is going to appear. It has a mode field, which allows you to switch between different layouts. So your layout can have different grids of keys controlled by a mode. And when you specify a particular mode, it'll switch the keyboard so that it shows the keys corresponding to that mode. There's other fields that let you customize the color palette, control things like whether the focus wraps vertically or horizontally as you navigate, and provides you the feedback, of course, when the key is focused or when the key is selected. Let's talk a little bit about the KDF file. So the KDF file is a way of specifying structured key layouts. The KDF file will have one or more sections. A section is a group of horizontal keys. So in the picture at the bottom here, there's actually 4 sections laid out horizontally. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of the sections can have one or more grid. Each grid will be the actual keys that appear in that section. And the reason why you might want to have more than one grid is because when you go to different modes, the grid will be replaced with a different grid of keys. And then the grids can have one or more rows, and each row can have one or more keys. It's all kind of set up to make simple things be simple and more complicated things possible. In this case, this is actually a fairly complicated keyboard because it has multiple sections. Some of the sections have different numbers of keys in each row. Not super complicated, but it is a little bit more complex. But in general, you can specify a keyboard width, a keyboard height, and the software will do the right thing to make all the keys the right sizes. And if you don't like the way that we do it automatically, there is a way to override those properties so you can get the layout to be exactly how you want it.
And as an extension of the text edit box, we have this new voice text edit box, which has all the fields and functionality of the old text edit box, but with this custom dictation interface. It includes a field that you could set the dictation mode, as previously talked about, for email, search, passwords, and numeric characters. And the Dictation UI is specifically designed to be a drop-in replacement for existing keyboard uses, such as the full-size keyboard, and also the mini keyboard and the Penpad. You can see the hint UI only encompasses what is the current keyboard's space encompasses.
Okay, and the final new node type that we're going to talk about is dynamic keyboard base. This is the base class for the new versions of the existing keyboards: dynamic keyboard, dynamic mini keyboard, and dynamic Penpad, as well as the base for this new dynamic custom keyboard where you supply your own KDF file to have a custom key layout. So it's going to combine a voice text edit box on the top, a dynamic key grid on the bottom, And there's some built-in plumbing to connect the two so that when you enter a key, the key that you entered gets reflected in the voice text edit box. The remainder of our time, we're going to go through actually building a custom keyboard to kind of go step by step to show you how you could create your own keyboard. So suppose that our user interface design team gave us these requirements. They want a keyboard to let you enter someone's name. So maybe like registering for the conference, we're going to enter in somebody's name. So we need to be able to support uppercase and lowercase letters. We want support for inserting a space, for switching from uppercase to lowercase, and a way to backspace in case you make a mistake. We want the keyboard to span most of the width of the display. So we want it to be really wide and to have minimal height. So it's going to be wide and not very tall. So it won't take up very much screen real estate. We want it to be customizable for different languages. And that's one thing I didn't mention. The KDF file, you can specify different KDF files for different locales, just like you can specify different strings for different locales. And depending on the device's language setting, it will load the appropriate KDF. So if you have the language setting to French, you can load a French KDF file and get a different key layout. And we also want the keyboard to support voice dictations of letter by letter, so you can spell your name. So after going back and forth with the UX team, we decide on this solution. We want the main part of the keyboard to be a single row of 26 alpha keys. We've all seen keyboards like this that just go A to Z. So we're going to have a keyboard that has one section. So there's not going to be different horizontal groupings of keys. The section is going to have two different grids, one for uppercase mode and one for lowercase mode. It's going to have two rows. The first row is going to have the 26 characters, and then we'll have a second row that has the action keys for caps lock, shift, and delete. I do want to note that the dynamic mini keyboard node that's already included in the firmware would let you solve this same problem, but it would be a grid of keys instead of a row of keys. There's some arguments that the grid is better because you use less key presses, but we won't get into that now. So how would I approach this problem? Well, first of all, I like to just get something working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a very basic KDF file that's just got the letters A, B, C. So there's one section, one grid that has one row and three keys. I'm going to use that in a custom RSG component that extends dynamic custom keyboard. And then I'm going to see how that works and then extend that. So the KDF file is going to look something like this. I need to specify, in this case, I'm going to have all the keys be the same size. So I'm going to specify the overall keyboard width, and I'm going to specify the keyboard height. For the width, I want it to be as fairly wide, fill most of the screen. For FHD or 1080p resolution, the screen is 1920 pixels wide. So 1400 will fill up, about 3/4 of that. I want the keys to all have the same size in the row that has 26 keys. So I want the number to be divisible by 26. So that's why I chose 1404. And if I divide that by 26, each key is going to be 54 pixels wide. Then I can specify the keyboard height, which says that the height of the keys is going to be 60. So that's pretty simple. You would usually specify values for HD or a 720p layout also. And that's the same except for you leave the F off. So anyway, so this initial keyboard I'm working with has one section, one grid, one row of keys, and the keys, there's an A, B, and a C key. By default, when you specify a key that has a label, when you select that key, that's the character that will get added to the text edit box. So in this case, when I select the A, B, and C key, it's going to just add those letters to the inputted string. Then I also need to write a simple component. So I create a custom component that extends dynamic custom keyboard, and it has just the very simplest script where I specify the KDF file. In this case, it's a local file in my channel package. I set horizontal wrap to true so that when I'm at one of the ends of the keyboard and go left or right, the focus will wrap around, which is a nice shortcut when you have a long row of keys. And I'm going to start with voice enabled false. By default, it's going to be true, but it doesn't really matter. It would work either way. So let's just take a quick look at a video. Let's take a quick look at a video that shows this keyboard in action. So you see I can move around. when I select a key, it's going to be reflected up there. And, not too exciting, but, I was able to get this together fairly quickly, and it gives me a really good basis for adding the rest of the features that I need. So our next step is we want to finish the KDF file. Well, to do that, we need to add the rest of the lowercase keys to the grid. In this case, it's pretty trivial. I just need to take each of those keys, A, B, C, and add 23 more of them so that I'll have keys from A to Z. I want to add a second row of keys that has the 3 action keys, the caps lock, space, and delete keys. So my keyboard or my grid will have the long row of 26 keys and 3 keys below it. And then I'm going to want to add a second grid that supports uppercase characters. So I'll take the first grid and I'll copy it and make some simple edits to have it, enter A, capital B through Z. So to add the second row of keys, I'm going to add a row that has 3 keys. These keys are going to have icons instead of labels. And when you have a key with an icon, or actually when you have any key, but when you have keys with icons, you definitely want to do this. You also are going to specify this stir out attribute, which tells you the string that's going to get emitted when the key is selected. So in this case, this key will emit the string shift. And then it'll be up to some scripting or some built-in behavior in the dynamic keyboard base node to decide what to do when a shift is received. So I have a key that's going to output shift, one that's going to output space, and one that's going to output backspace. And then finally, once I have that first grid that has all of the keys and the 3 action keys, I'm going to actually add a second grid to my JSON file for the uppercase mode. So I'll have my original one that's mode alpha lower and my uppercase one mode alpha upper. And the rows for those true grids will be different. So let's take a look and see what this looks like now. So you see I have the full row, the full set of lowercase keys. Again, when you select them, you get the key the character that corresponds to the key's label. When I'm moving down here and I select a space, well, you see that actually worked. Dynamic keyboard base has some other additional behavior. In addition to outputting the stir out or the label associated with the key, there's also some special strings that it recognizes. Space and backspace are among those. So when you hit space, it'll actually automatically enter in the space or enter in a space in your string without you having to add any scripting. And backspace works the same. So you'll see that this is all working here when we do the space and the backspace. There's backspace in action. But what won't work is when you go over here and select the caps lock key. In this case, what happens? You get the stir out entered into the voice text edit box. So in this case, you actually see the string shift entered into your voice text edit box. Obviously, that's not what you want to have happen. So we're going to need to add just a really simple script to handle shift, and we'll show you how that works next. So the next step here is to add some scripting. So it's not very complicated. We need to add we need to add an interface function to our component that has the name key selected. This is a special function that, if it's defined, will get called each time a character is entered in your keyboard and give you the chance to do some custom action based on the string the string that's been entered. In our init function, I'm going to go ahead and set the initial mode to alpha upper. Since we're entering people's names, we'd like to enter the keyboard with the capital letters displayed. And then I need to implement this key selected function. It takes the key that's been entered as the string, so this stir out parameter or the label if the stir out is not specified in the KDF file, and it's going to return true or false depending on whether the script handles that key or not. So the script is really simple. If the string that's received is shift, I'm going to toggle between upper and lowercase mode, and I'm going to return true to say, hey, I've handled that key and I don't need to do anything else. If I return false, it will drop into the the built-in logic in the dynamic keyboard base to enter the characters or to handle these few special keys like space and backspace. So let's take a look at this in action. So you see when we start, we're in the uppercase mode. We set that up in the init function. And now the caps lock works when we change it. When we select the caps lock button, it goes between upper and lowercase, and we're able to enter in a name. So at this point, we pretty much have things working the way we'd like them to for English. But what if we, how are we going to meet this requirement for French? Well, one way is you can add pop-up suggestions. So in the KDF file, for any key, you can add some suggestions that have other options for that letter and a trigger, which usually we're just going to want it to be hover, which means the pop-up's going to show when the focus lands on one of the keys that has suggestions. So in this case, we have the lowercase e is going to have 4 options, which are the 4 various accents that you can have in French for the letter E. And let's take a quick look at that. So I'm entering in the name. I think we're going to enter in Francois, which has a C with a cedilla underneath it. Notice that, yeah, it takes quite a while to go back and forth on a long row of keys. So here we're getting to the interesting part. Oh no. Sorry, I'll get back there in just a second. All right, so when focus lands on the C, this little pop-up shows up that shows the regular C or a C with a cedilla underneath it. You can move left or right and choose the one that you want. We have this hover thing with a delay so that if you're just going back and forth on the keyboard, the pop-up doesn't show up immediately. It only shows up if you rest on it. So now if we continue playing the video, you'll see that I select the C with the accent character, and we go on and enter in the rest of the name. Okay, and then finally, the other thing I want to do is I want to be able to control the colors. So like the dialogues and the keyboards, we've added this palette concept that lets you specify a set of predefined colors, and those control the color of the keyboard. So in this case, I'm going to create this RSG palette node. I'm going to set it to an AA that overrides the colors that I want. The keyboard color is the background of the key grid. The focus color is the color of the focus ring, and the input food color is the color of the text edit box background. So if we go back and forth, you can see that this is what it looks like originally down in the lower right. And when I apply the palette, it just kind of looks better with the background. It's a little bit less in your face. Even without the palette, it's usable, but it's kind of nicer this way. Usually we would just set the palette on the scene of your entire channel. And so it would just apply to all the keyboards. But if you want something custom for a particular keyboard, you can actually set it on the specific keyboard as well. And now Shane's going to talk a little bit about adding voice support.
Hi, I wanted to walk through some of the different fields that are available and settings that you can use to control voice functionality. One example is the voice enabled field, which is enabled by default to voice enable a keyboard, but it gives a toggle that you can set to true or false to disable voice functionality if need be. And the voice entry type is a field that allows you to set the actual context of what kind of dictation you're doing. Generic would be full word input. Email would be letter by letter input, with the ability also to complete different email domains. Like you can do ABC, and then you could just finish it off with @gmail.com. Alphanumeric is a more generic letter by letter interface that will allow inputting both numbers and letters. And numeric is for just numbers, for like a Penpad keyboard, for example. And password is a special dictation type for entering in passwords, and that supports unique characters. and uppercase and lowercase letters. For even more refine of what is allowed to be dictated, you can set the voice input regex filter, which can allow a more limited set of characters to be dictated. So if you want to further limit, say if you wanted to use an alphanumeric keyboard dictation type, but omit some letters that would that are not supported. And if you want to do more functionality off of this, you can put an observer on is dictating, and this will be set to true when the user is actively dictating something. Next slide. So here's an example of a zip code keyboard that extends a dynamic custom keyboard. You can see we set a custom zip code KDF file, and we set voice enabled to be true. And because this is an international, and let's say England, you have zip codes that are not just numbers. So we decided to do, they can also have A, B, C, or D in their postal code. So we set a voice entry type of alphanumeric, which would be the best for entering in letter by letter, but still supporting the full alphabet. And as a further refine, we set a regex filter, which limits the characters, the letters spoken to be just A, B, C, and D. So you want to be able to input an invalid postal code with, say, Z. So you have the full numbers, and A, B, C, and D are the only ones allowed.
All right, that pretty much concludes our presentation. The main points are the new keyboard nodes allow you to design custom key layouts, and it's really easy to add voice support to any keyboard, whether it's built-in or a custom keyboard. I think we're going to go to questions now.
Yep. So let me share my screen, and we will take a look, see what we have. All right, guys, keep upvoting, downvoting questions. We got a few good ones here. So Jim, Shane, are you guys ready?
Sure.
Yep. All right, let's fire away here. Maddie's asking, will the new dynamic keyboards allow specifying a font?
Yeah, there's no plans right now to allow that. I can't really comment whether they will in the future or not.
Awesome. All right, from Kevin, will there be improved support for wrapping around the keyboard when there are disabled keys on the right or left sides?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Maybe
I could have Kevin if you want. Do you want to?
Sure. Why don't you let him clarify just a little bit?
Sure. Let me go into, let's see here. So Kevin, do you want to use the raise hand feature? Hey, there we go. Thank you. And let me see now if I can, give me 1 second. And then what I'll do is I will unmute you. Give me 1 second here. Participants. See, once I just have to go find, we've got a list of 75 participants. So let's just find Kevin. Kevin's got his hand up. Kevin, I'm going to allow you to talk. So ready, set, here we go.
Okay, what I found is when I had when I set a key to disabled on the right-hand side, and I turned on wrap around when you're scrolling, if I went all the way to the left and tried to hit left again, it would not wrap if the rightmost key was disabled.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like something we should definitely fix. It just sounds like a bug. Probably there's a way for you to, yeah, there may be a way for you to look for the key that has the focus and kind of handle this yourself in a script.
I did hack a solution together, but it's hit and miss.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, you're right. It's probably is just a bug.
So Kevin, my ask you, can you you can at least put your in the Dev Summit, the voice keyboard Slack channel. Can you actually just describe this scenario, and then we can actually open a ticket for it and then get that prioritized?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's see what else we have here. I guess let's see. We've got a couple seated questions. I'm gonna move over these guys. We'll come back to these in a second. Well, let's do this one. It's a fun one. So if I'm building a custom keyboard, or actually, let me ask this way: when do I have to specify a KDF file? Is that if I'm using a standard keyboard, or is it for the dynamic case?
Yeah, if you're just using one of our normal keyboards that correspond to the old original keyboards, you don't specify a KDF file. But if you want to do anything custom, you have to specify a KDF file.
An existing mini keyboard instance, for example, can be updated to use the voice functionality and some of the new features just by changing it to dynamic mini keyboard instead of just mini keyboard. And the same goes for like a full-size keyboard and a Penpad. But the dynamic custom keyboard is when we can really start using a custom KDF file to make a really interesting keyboard that's that wasn't previously possible or wasn't very easy to do.
Yeah.
Right. Another one of our questions: does focus have to be on the text box for dictation to work?
No. So when a keyboard's on the screen, the consensus is that anywhere that there is focus, a voice dictation should go directly to the keyboard. And so that's the way it works for our keyboards.
Okay.
So there's no need to, finagle with the remote to focus a certain box.
All right, here's a fun question from Jamie. So does the Penpad support hiding the pin as you enter it into the keyboard? So the kiddies aren't seeing your pin?
You want to answer
that? Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, we actually do. If you want to you could actually hide the button movements itself by pressing the star key on a Penpad, and it'll hide the focus, so they won't be able to tell how you're maneuvering around the Penpad to memorize your pin code. Maybe you can explain more.
And also, if you just want to obscure the pin in the text edit box, that works